Nous savons qu'il y a encore des frictions entre les États-Unis et l'Afrique du Sud. Nous travaillons à ce que cette tension puisse disparaître. Nous vivons dans un monde qui est globalisé. Je crois que nous avons tous besoin les uns des autres. Les États-Unis ont besoin de l'Afrique, aussi bien pour ses ressources, ses richesses, etc. Et l'Afrique a besoin également des États-Unis pour son savoir-faire, sa technologie, ses investissements.
We need some people from South Sudan.
First Post reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change, to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post.
Ils ne partiront pas de certains pays. Ils ont juste dissous le dispositif. Vous ne les verrez plus dans des bases, mais dans les ambassades, ils seront là. Ils vont constituer des sociétés de sécurité pour sécuriser leurs sociétés qui existent dans ces pays-là. Mais les soldats seront là. Mais vous ne les verrez plus en tenue ou rassemblés dans des bases. C'est tout ce que ça veut dire. Ils vont se réorganiser, mais seront là.
South Africa has become the unlikely fault line in a growing fracture inside the Western alliance, exposing tensions between the United States and France that have been quietly building for years. What once appeared to be a unified Western approach toward Africa is now visibly strained, with Pretoria's increasingly independent foreign policy forcing Washington and Paris into divergent strategic positions. The disagreement is not driven by ideology alone, but by economics, security, energy, global governance, and the accelerating shift toward a multipolar world order. For decades after the end of apartheid, South Africa was widely viewed in Western capitals as a natural partner, politically aligned with liberal democratic norms, economically integrated into global markets, and diplomatically cooperative with the United States and Europe. That assumption has steadily eroded. Pretoria's post-Cold War identity has evolved into one defined less by Western alignment and more by strategic autonomy, South-South cooperation, and resistance to external pressure. The United States has grown increasingly uneasy with this shift. South Africa's role within BRICS, its refusal to condemn Russia in absolute terms following the Ukraine conflict, its expanding trade and political engagement with China, and its vocal criticism of Western double standards in global institutions have all triggered alarm in Washington. American policymakers increasingly frame South Africa not as a dependable ally, but as a swing state in global geopolitics, one whose choices could influence the balance of power across the global South. France, however, approaches South Africa from a different angle. Paris has watched its traditional influence across Francophone Africa decline rapidly. Following military withdrawals, political backlash, and the collapse of long-standing security partnerships in the Sahel, as French influence weakens in West and Central Africa, South Africa emerges as one of the few African powers with continental legitimacy, diplomatic reach, and economic weight. For France, maintaining strong ties with Pretoria has become less about alignment and more about relevance. This divergence has sharpened tensions between Washington and Paris. The United States has increasingly emphasized conditional engagement using trade access, diplomatic pressure, and security cooperation as leverage to push South Africa closer to Western positions. France, by contrast, has adopted a more pragmatic posture, recognizing that overt pressure risks driving Pretoria further toward alternative blocs and partners. At the heart of the disagreement is South Africa's insistence on non-alignment. Pretoria has repeatedly stated that it will not be drawn into great power rivalries or forced to choose sides in conflicts shaped by historical Western dominance. This stance resonates across much of Africa, where memories of colonial exploitation, Cold War proxy wars, and economic conditionality remain fresh. South Africa's position is not isolated. It reflects a broader continental shift towards strategic independence. Economic factors play a central role in this standoff. South Africa remains deeply integrated into Western markets, with the United States and the European Union among its largest trading partners. Programs like the African Growth and Opportunity Act provide preferential access to U.S. markets, particularly for South African manufactured goods, automotive exports, and agricultural products. Yet this economic interdependence has increasingly become a source of friction rather than stability. American officials have openly questioned whether South Africa should continue to benefit from trade preferences while pursuing policies perceived as hostile to U.S. strategic interests. Congressional debates, policy reports, and diplomatic signals have all hinted at the possibility of reassessing the relationship. For Washington, economic leverage remains a powerful tool and a warning. France, meanwhile, sees economic engagement as a stabilizing force rather than a weapon. French corporations remain invested in South African energy, infrastructure, defense, and telecommunications sectors. Paris has framed cooperation with Pretoria as essential for maintaining European influence in Africa at a time when China, Russia, and Gulf states are expanding their footprint. Pressuring South Africa too aggressively, French officials argue, risks accelerating Europe's marginalization. The conflict also reflects competing security visions. The United States views Africa increasingly through the lens of global competition with China and Russia. Military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and counterterrorism partnerships are framed as components of a broader effort to prevent rivals from gaining strategic footholds. South Africa's refusal to host Western military assets or align its security posture accordingly has raised red flags. France's security calculus is shaped by recent failures. The collapse of French-led counterterrorism missions in the Sahel and the rise of anti-French sentiment have forced Paris to reconsider its approach. Rather than projecting power unilaterally, France now seeks multilateral legitimacy. South Africa, with its peacekeeping experience and diplomatic credibility, is seen as a potential partner rather than a subordinate. Energy politics further complicate the picture. South Africa's energy transition away from coal toward renewables and alternative energy sources has attracted significant Western interest. The Just Energy Transition Partnership, backed by the United States and European governments, was presented as a landmark initiative to support decarbonization while protecting economic stability. Yet disagreements over financing terms, conditionality, and sovereignty have surfaced. Washington has pushed for stronger oversight and policy alignment tied to funding. Paris has been more cautious, aware that heavy-handed conditions risk backlash not only in South Africa but across Africa. The dispute over energy financing mirrors a broader disagreement about how the West should engage with African states in an era of declining leverage. South Africa's diplomatic actions have further intensified scrutiny. Pretoria's decision to pursue legal action against Israel at international courts, its criticism of Western responses to global conflicts, and its emphasis on reforming global institutions have positioned it as a vocal challenger to Western dominance. The United States has viewed some of these moves as confrontational. France has treated them as expressions of sovereignty. Behind closed doors, this has produced friction. Diplomatic exchanges reveal competing priorities, Washington pushing for alignment, Paris urging restraint. The disagreement is not openly hostile, but it is unmistakable. South Africa has become the testing ground for whether Western unity can survive in a world where influence must be negotiated rather than assumed. Pretoria is acutely aware of this leverage. South Africa's leaders understand that their country occupies a strategic space few others can claim, the most industrialized economy in Africa, a gateway to the continent, a leader in multilateral forums, and a symbol of post-colonial independence. By refusing to bend, South Africa has forced Western powers to confront the limits of their influence. This strategy is not without risks. Economic retaliation, reduced diplomatic support, and strained relations with key partners remain real possibilities. South Africa's economy faces internal challenges, including unemployment, energy shortages, and inequality. Western investment still matters, yet Pretoria appears willing to absorb short-term pressure in exchange for long-term autonomy. France's balancing act reflects its own vulnerabilities. As Paris loses ground in traditional spheres of influence, it cannot afford to alienate one of Africa's most influential states. French diplomacy has therefore emphasized dialogue, respect for sovereignty, and mutual interests even when disagreements arise. This approach has occasionally put France at odds with Washington's more confrontational posture. The United States, for its part, faces a strategic dilemma. Pushing South Africa to hard risks, confirming accusations of neo-colonial behavior and accelerating Africa's pivot toward alternative partners. Backing off, however, could signal weakness and encourage other states to challenge Western preferences. The result has been an inconsistent approach that frustrates both allies and critics. European unity has also been tested. While France has taken a leading role in advocating engagement, other European states have oscillated between Washington's pressure tactics and Paris's pragmatism. This lack of coherence has further emboldened Pretoria, which has skillfully navigated competing Western agendas. South Africa's stance resonates beyond its borders. Other African countries observe how Pretoria is treated and draw conclusions about their own room for maneuver. If South Africa can maintain trade, investment, and diplomatic standing while asserting independence, it sets a precedent. If it faces punitive measures, it serves as a warning. Either outcome will shape Africa's future relations with the West. The broader context is impossible to ignore. The global order that emerged after the Cold War is fragmenting, power is diffusing. Economic growth is increasingly concentrated outside traditional Western centers. Africa, once peripheral, is becoming central to global competition over resources, markets, and influence. South Africa sits at the crossroads of this transformation. France's willingness to adapt reflects an acknowledgement of this reality. The United States' resistance reflects a struggle to adjust. Neither approach is guaranteed to succeed. What is clear is that the era of unquestioned Western dominance in Africa is over. South Africa's choices have exposed this truth. By refusing to align automatically, Pretoria has forced Washington and Paris to confront their differences, reassess their strategies, and negotiate influence rather than impose it. The resulting tensions are not a temporary dispute. They are symptoms of a deeper shift. As global institutions face calls for reform, as emerging powers demand greater representation, and as Africa asserts its agency, the South Africa question will not fade. It will intensify. The country's actions will continue to reverberate through Western capitals, shaping debates about engagement, power, and the future of the international system. In this unfolding contest, South Africa is not merely a participant, it is a catalyst. The fractures it has exposed between the United States and France reveal more than disagreement over one country's policies. They reveal a Western alliance struggling to adapt to a world where influence must be earned, not assumed. The outcome remains uncertain, but one reality is already clear. South Africa has stopped asking for permission. And in doing so, it has forced the West to confront a new global order, one where Africa is no longer on the sidelines, and where unity among traditional powers can no longer be taken for granted.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.